All right, let's put the women and children to bed and go looking for dinner. John Rothstein here on my new college basketball podcast on CBS, coming to you once again for all the content exclusively to you 52 weeks out of the calendar year. Later in the show, we'll be joined by Utes head coach Alex Jensen. Want to remind you to hit that subscribe button on the CBS Sports College Basketball YouTube page, and also want to remind you that an official name for this show, as well as a place everywhere you can get podcasts, Apple, Spotify, is all coming soon as we continue to dissect, digest, and offer some perspective on the world of college basketball. But as always, let's get it going with three big things. One of the things that I love doing this time of year in the summer, I know certain people love to go on vacation and certain people love to gear up for their respective seasons. But one of the things I do as I'm preparing for the next college basketball season I'm going to cover is I love to prepare preseason content and make lists of all sorts of things that get people excited for the upcoming year. And starting next month, we are going to, week by week, do different conference previews. And I started to dive in last week to the ACC, and you start looking at the personnel of the conference, a conference that has really struggled the last couple of years. Obviously, we wouldn't have seen necessarily the ACC get a fourth team into the NCAA tournament last year if North Carolina did not make the first four. We also wouldn't have been in a situation where we would have seen the ACC get a fifth team into the NCAA tournament in 2024 if NC State didn't win the ACC tournament. And I still firmly believe that we would not have seen, for all intents and purposes, Virginia in the NCAA tournament in 2024 if we had seen more worthy teams like a Seton Hall get their name called on Selection Sunday. But that's neither here nor there. The bottom line is this: when you're evaluating next season, returning personnel in the ACC, and you're evaluating the optics of who's coming into the conference with cachet, it is very difficult to forecast in some ways who the best players in the league are going to be entering next season. Duke lost Cooper Flagg, Con Knippel. Clemson lost Chase Hunter, Ian Shefflin. And now you're looking at what teams have brought in. Louisville did a tremendous job in the transfer portal, bringing in Ryan Conwell and Isaac McNeely. Obviously, Duke's going to bring in a talented freshman class and also Cam Boozer, who I love as a face-up big man. But I think if you're evaluating things right now, and if you're looking at a potential all-ACC preseason first team, you would have to say Cam Boozer, even though I'm not somebody who obviously likes to put freshmen in that position, I just don't think there's a quality of returning players in the ACC to put certain players on an all-ACC preseason first team. I would go with Cam Boozer, even though he's a freshman. I would go with Ryan Conwell, who's transferring from Xavier to Louisville. I would also go with Marcus Burton, who led the league in scoring last year at Notre Dame. And I would probably go with Seth Trimble from North Carolina, because I think Trimble's going to have a big, big year for the Tar Heels in the backcourt. North Carolina, obviously a program that lost Ian Jackson, RJ Davis, and also Elliot Cadeau. But I think if you really split the atom, I think if you really look in deep, I think unequivocally, you look at the personnel, you look at the criteria for the personnel, and then you start looking at the production of the personnel. And Darrion Williams, who transferred from Texas Tech to NC State, should unequivocally be the ACC Preseason Player of the Year. Look at what Williams did in the NCAA tournament last year. 4 NCAA tournament games for the Red Raiders, who advanced all the way to the Elite Eight before losing to Florida in a devastating loss in Northern California. What did Darrion Williams do in those 4 games? 21 points, 7 rebounds, about 3 assists. That is what you are looking at if you are an NC State fan. This is somebody, again, who was not the focal point for Texas Tech, because Texas Tech had the Big 12 Player of the Year and an All-American in JT Toppin. Now Darrion Williams comes to NC State and he gets a bigger bite of the apple. Now Darrion Williams comes to NC State and he gets the opportunity to showcase his ability to be a focal point for Will Wade in the NC State Wolfpack. And if you're looking again at a preseason All-ACC first team, I would go with Cam Boozer. I would go with Darrion Williams. I would go with Ryan Conwell, who I absolutely love, from going from Xavier to Louisville. I would also go with Marcus Burton, and I would go with Seth Trimble. Can you make a case for other players? Sure. You could throw Isaac McNeely, who went from Virginia to Louisville, in the mix. There are others. I'm not somebody, again, as we're going to be doing preseason awards, who tends to lean towards freshmen. But the other guys who are returning for Duke, the Caleb Fosters, the Isaiah Evans, I'm not ready to put them on an all preseason first team for the ACC. So it's really, when you split the atom, based on winning, based on production, and based on the situation that he's going to find himself in, Darrion Williams from NC State should unequivocally be the ACC preseason player of the year entering the 25-26 season. And I don't even think it's much of a debate. And again, if there's a storyline right now going into next season for the ACC, it's that 3 of the ACC's better brands who all made new head coaching hires. Will Wade at NC State, Virginia with Ryan Odom, and Jay Lucas at Miami. Those 3 schools all improved the rosters and all made excellent hires at the head coaching position. The second thing I want to get into, and it's another preseason type deal. Again, as I go through these lists, there are different criteria for some people I want to anoint to certain levels. There's the breakout player. The breakout player, according to me, is somebody who did not average in double figures anytime previously in the college career. There's also impact freshmen. There's impact transfers. And then I make a selective list of players who could become stars during the upcoming season. This means a player who's proven himself at the collegiate level, but now during the upcoming year will go from that level to an all-conference caliber level or higher. And one player you have to start talking about as somebody who could be an absolute star during the 25-26 season is Darrion Williams' former teammate at Texas Tech, Christian Anderson. We know JT Toppin is going to be a candidate to be the National Player of the Year. We know that. We understand that. We appreciate that. But Christian Anderson is somebody, maybe because Darrion Williams was also at Texas Tech, maybe because Texas Tech also had a sniper from deep in Chance McMillan. But whatever it is, Christian Anderson very quietly had an incredible year as a freshman for a Texas Tech team that went all the way to the Elite Eight before losing to Florida. Averaged in double figures, made in excess of 70 three-point shots, and shot better than 38% from three-point range. But Christian Anderson did not play his best basketball in the NCAA tournament. He was just 5 of 25 from 3. He did have 22 in that big comeback win against Arkansas in the Sweet 16. But this is a guy, again, and I'm not saying I'm going to put him all Big 12 preseason first team, but if you're looking now at a player that could go from being a little bit of a national afterthought, with the exception of the real deep hoops junkies, to somebody who could be one of the best players in the Big 12 and a potential dark horse All-American, Christian Anderson fits that criteria. And he fits it unequivocally. And if you look now, and this is one thing I want to point out, Texas Tech had obviously a tremendous season under Grant McCasland. Texas Tech had obviously a real chance to go to the Final Four. But with that said, the only players of significance that Texas Tech brings back is JT Toppin, who's going to be a National Player of the Year candidate, and Christian Anderson. Christian Anderson will not only emerge, in my opinion, to be a potential star in 25-26, Texas Tech needs him to be a potential star and play like a star for the Red Raiders to get back to where they were last season, and that's having a chance to go to the Final Four in the Elite Eight. And it feels like we have a changing of the guard right now in the Big 12. For years, everybody's chasing Kansas and Baylor. And now you have, if you're starting the season, and again, I'm going to get into the deep dive with the Big 12 coming up in July, but you've got Houston in the 1 spot. I'd put BYU in the 2, Texas Tech in the 3, and then you have to probably say Iowa State and Arizona before you get to Kansas and Baylor. Kansas and Baylor will not be projected to finish in the top 5 of the Big 12 next season. But this is only June. And one thing that's not changing in June, and this is my third big thing I want to get to, is the anticipation for the burgeoning rivalry between St. John's and UConn. Something I have said repeatedly here on this show that can't be denied because it's the most burgeoning rivalry in college basketball. And I was having a conversation last week with a college basketball executive, and he was asking me, John, which games are you most looking forward to next season? And I was like, there's not enough time to get into that. There's so many great games to look forward to. And I was like, you're going to have UConn in Florida in the Garden. You're going to have St. John's in Kentucky in the CBS Sports Classic. You're going to have Duke play Michigan in February. You're going to have Duke go on the road to take on Michigan State in East Lansing on campus. You're going to have Carolina go to Kentucky as part of the ACC SEC Challenge. And then the person said, those are non-conference games and they're great. But in league play, what are you most looking forward to? And I started to think about the rivalries that have really, really ignited college basketball. Duke and Carolina, Kentucky and Louisville. Those two rivalries don't come close to what's between St. John's and UConn right now. And frankly, nothing does. Because rivalries are fueled by tension. Rivalries are fueled with hostility. And last week on this podcast, one of the things I talked about was the fact that the Big East is wide open next season or this upcoming season after St. John's and UConn. And that's unequivocally the truth. But it's also because the storylines surrounding these two programs could not be more fascinating. And I remember just growing up as a kid, there are certain times where two figures are linked together. When I was real young and I watched professional wrestling, it was Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair. When it got to the 90s and I loved the heavyweight division in boxing, it was Mike Tyson and Evander Holyfield. People then get into adolescence. People who love the NFL looked at Peyton Manning and Tom Brady. We are now seeing Rick Pitino and Dan Hurley linked together. They're the last two coaches to win the Naismith Coach of the Year award. They're the last two coaches to lead their teams to Big East regular season titles and Big East tournament titles. They're also two coaches who have won multiple national championships. Bill Self is obviously another one who has won more than one national title. And Pitino and Hurley are not people that are going to get together for a drink anytime soon. There may be a mutual respect, but there's really nothing but tension and hostility. And you look at the two teams entering next season, St. John's and UConn will both be ranked somewhere between the top 5 and the top 10. UConn returns over 60% of its scoring from a team that took Florida to the limit in the round of 32. They are set up by their standards for a massive bounce back weekend that should end somewhere deep in the NCAA tournament. And if you are a St. John's fan right now, you are watching the golden era of St. John's basketball, because for 25 years, you didn't win an NCAA tournament game. And for 40 years, you didn't win a Big East regular season title. And St. John's will enter next season. I'm not saying they have the best team, but they will enter next season with the most talented roster in the sport. Two programs linked. Two head coaches linked, like Hogan and Flair, like Tyson and Holyfield, like Manning and Brady. The irresistible force meeting the immovable object. And I, for one, as somebody who eats college basketball for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and an afternoon snack, I hope there are 4 meetings between St. John's and UConn next season. One in Connecticut, one regular season game at Madison Square Garden, another in the Big East tournament at Madison Square Garden. And wouldn't it be something if Hurley and Pitino went mano a mano at the Final Four in Indianapolis? But you know as well as I do, this is only June. Your comments when we return. It's time to engage with you, the college basketball fan who I live for and who I get up every day for, because you know as well as I do, we sleep in May. Your comments and questions next.
What's he like? The happy-faced killer?
You mean my dad? Be glad you never have to know.
You think that you're so much better than me.
You're just like your old man.
I'm not like you at all.
All right, John Rothstein back here on the CBS Sports College Basketball YouTube page, taking your questions right now in the stream. Want you to get here on the live chat. Get in it right now. Let's see who is fired. It looks like a lot of NC State fans. Here we go. Darrion Williams Burner says, John, Darrion is different. There is no doubt about that. And then College Football Prodigy says, John, Darius Acuff is going to be the SEC Player of the Year. I don't know if I am ready to say that, but I will say this. When you think about the potential of Acuff and DJ Wagner together, you are looking at, in my opinion, Arkansas being a legitimate contender for an SEC regular season title and maybe the top contender for Florida in the SEC, top contender to Florida in the SEC. Joe Ireland says that Ejiofor is cooking for St. John's. Well, it's interesting you brought up Zuby Ejiofor because so much has been made about St. John's transfer portal class, and for good reason. You have Ian Jackson, you have Joe Zonsanen, you have Osiah Sellers, you have Dylan Mitchell, Bryce Hopkins as well. But now you are looking at a player in Zuby Ejiofor who, in my opinion, will enter next season as the Big East preseason player of the year. He will enter next season as a second or third team All-American, and he will be very much in the mix, along with guys like Joseph Tugler of Houston, to be the National Defensive Player of the Year. Ollie Reed Sports says, John, do you believe that West Virginia can be a dark horse in the Big 12 next season? You know, Ollie, check back in July when we do the Big 12 preview. I look at it like this. If you are going to be an NCAA tournament team in the Big 12, you got to be in that top 7 or 8. I have given you my top 5 today. Houston, BYU, Texas Tech, Iowa State, Arizona, Cincinnati, Kansas, Baylor, all in there as well. That is my top 8. And Kansas State also with PJ Haggerty will have a first-team All-American in tow. Ashley Quinlan wants to know, John, do you think Ian Jackson can be a high-level point guard for St. John's? Well, that's the key to the season, Ashley. Ian Jackson is somebody who comes to St. John's taking the baton from Kadari Richmond as the big guard who can set the table for Rick Pitino's squad. This is what I'll say about Ian Jackson. He played the point guard position in high school. He played it in AAU. He did not play it last year at North Carolina because they had Elliot Cadeau and they had RJ Davis. That is going to be the most important thing for Rick Pitino to work out here during the offseason, is making sure that Ian Jackson is a suitable and capable point guard for St. John's. But here's another thing about St. John's. St. John's wasn't just, I would say, an average offensive team last year. It was a below average offensive team, especially shooting the basketball. I have not seen St. John's practice in person yet, but from all reports I get, St. John's doesn't have the potential to just be a good shooting team. It has a chance to be an elite shooting team. And you know, obviously, Rick Pitino all summer long is going to work on the defense. Seth wants to know, John, what do you think of the non-conference gauntlet that Miracle Mac is building? Well, Grant McCasland is scheduling right now like somebody who is aiming to be a very high seed in the NCAA tournament. This is what we got, and one of these games was added last week. I was going to talk about later in the show, but you'll bring it up. This is what you got if you're Texas Tech. You're on the road at Illinois, start of a home-and-home series. You got 2 games in Bahamar. Start with Wake Forest, then you get Memphis or Purdue. Obviously, the matchup everybody thinks that will happen in the finals is Purdue against Texas Tech. Texas Tech then also is going to play LSU in Fort Worth. They're also going to play Duke at Madison Square Garden, and they're going to play Arkansas in Dallas on December 13th. So that, to me, shows that Grant McCasland is scheduling to be a very, very high seed in the NCAA tournament. Final one we'll take, Texas Tech. Randy wants to know, or is going to say, John, Darrion Williams, we missed Texas Tech. However, in his place, we have depth we've never had before. Look, Texas Tech, again, I talked about this at the top, did really well in the transfer portal on paper, but you just never know how the pieces are going to fit. And what I mean by that is it was really important to bring back JT Toppin. It was really important to bring back Christian Anderson, who I think is going to be an absolute star this year in the Big 12. But Texas Tech also lost a significant number of key contributors from that team that had Florida on the ropes late in the second half of the Elite Eight. But I've said it before, and I'll say it again. This is only June. Meanwhile, speaking of Texas Tech, a team that the Red Raiders are going to play moving forward in the Big 12 is Utah. The Utes have a new head coach. He was part of a magical run with Rick Majerus 27 years ago when Utah advanced all the way to the national championship game in 1998. He is Alex Jensen, and he joins us coming up next.
When you need your sports news all the time,
we've got breaking news to bring to you.
CBS Sports HQ gives you a snapshot of all the sports that matter to you. When you need your sports in a snap, find it on CBS Sports HQ, streaming free anywhere you are.
To be joined by the newly minted head coach of Utah, he is Alex Jensen. And Alex, welcome. What type of adjectives would you use to describe the last 3 months?
Adjectives. There's probably a lot of them you could use. Drinking from a fire hose is, I will say this, it's been fun and I've learned a lot. And I think with the landscapes changing, I think that's actually been enjoyable in a lot of ways, the learning part of it.
Well, you were an assistant before you went to the NBA at St. Louis with Coach Majerus, who you played for at Utah. From your vantage point, how much different is college basketball now versus when you were last in the game, a decade and a half ago at St. Louis?
Well, I remember right before I left St. Louis, it was right before they changed the rule that you could text your players. So a lot's changed. That was before, obviously, the money and everything. But I think there's a lot of things that are still the same, but it's changed a lot. For sure.
Alex, college basketball and college sports, obviously the on-court product has been as good as it's ever been, but there's still a lot of volatility off the floor, off the field. From your vantage point, why did you think now was a good time to leave the NBA?
I think, with the settlement, I think it's going to evolve a lot more in college, but I think there's since taking the job and even before, it reminded me a lot about my D-League days and, some aspects of Europe. Most European teams, they build a new team every year. But, I think it'll change. I think there'll be more guardrails put in place. But, I think it was more it was appealing because I think there was a way to do it. I could see a path forward in being successful.
I've talked to different NBA guys who have come to college about just managing the lifestyle with a family. When you look at now maybe coaching 35, 40 nights a year versus playing 82 like you did in the NBA, do you think that the college lifestyle may be more conducive to family life?
Yeah, no, there's a lot to be said for that. Yeah, there's not as many. In the NBA, it's like you're home for 2 days, you're gone for 2 days. It's kind of constant. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a lot of that, a lot more stability in college. I think, especially in the early going, there's a lot more to do in college. There's recruiting, there's, things with the university. So, there's some drawbacks that way, but I don't think it's as fast of a pace. And the season's much shorter.
Much shorter. And you're going to obviously start here over the next couple of weeks and months to start to mold your own team at your alma mater at Utah. I'm curious, what are the biggest things now as you are in your own coaching career that you've taken from Coach Rick Majerus and implemented with your own teams?
Being back here, the memories are coming back fast and furious. But no, Coach Majerus, I think, throughout my days playing and coaching, like that was the base, the foundation I had, and there's not a better teacher of the game. But I definitely take a lot of this stuff from him, just his approach. I think the basketball, you have your handful of principles you don't let up on. But I think what I was fortunate to have was, I was a head coach in the D-League for 2 years. And the best part about that, other than you're not under the microscope, you have time to find yourself, is, I think the inclination for most first-time head coaches is you try to be something you might not be. So I think I kind of try to do that at the beginning, but then you find your own personality, your own way. And no, definitely there's not a day that goes by that I don't think about Coach Majerus and something he taught me or said or did.
Did you and he ever talk about one day you coming back and being the head coach at Utah?
No, we never specifically talked about that. When I was with him in St. Louis, I came back and I interviewed with Larry Kristoviak when he got the job. And we talked about that specific job, but no, never talked about being the head coach here.
What was the relationship like with Coach Majerus when you were working for him versus when you played for him when you were at Utah?
You know what? It's a great question, because I tell the teammates I've had that it was a different relationship, and I was able to coach with them for 4 years. But yeah, it was. I think the thing for me, I got to see a different side of him.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I would drive him. I was the driver most of the time for those first couple of years, and when I dropped him off at the hotel, there was many times when, I never saw it as a player, but he said, he'd go, do you think I was too hard on him?
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't going to say yes, but yeah, I said, no, coach, it was good for him. And, I never thought he thought about that, so it was good to see both sides of him that he actually cared about them.
We're so removed now, almost 3 decades from that run in 98 where you and your teammates came, within inches of a national title, losing to Kentucky and San Antonio. But you think about now where we are in college sports, to have a team, even if the team did have Andre Miller and Hano Matala and Michael Doliak, to have a team from a non-power conference, go that far pretty regularly, because you guys were advancing to the second weekend of the NCAA tournament very regularly with Coach Majerus. As you look back, and now that you're in a different realm, what do you look back on and say, those were the greatest strengths that Coach Majerus had as a head coach?
I think with that team, one, looking at the pictures in the office, you realize how big we were.
Yeah, we
were big. And I think, times have changed. It's been almost 3 decades, like you said. But, none of those guys, their goal was not necessarily to play in the NBA. And I think it was kind of a perfect group for a perfect coach that fit him. And we stay in touch, but it can be done. And it was the continuity of it all as well.
Yeah.
Andre was a junior, Mike was a senior, Hano was a junior, but, guys that continuity at any level is still underrated. But it was a good group of guys that fit, that's kind of what now, it roster building, which is, even more important in college now, but we fit together well.
Well, that brings me to my next question. What are your own impressions of the roster you've put together as you get set to begin your first season at Utah?
Like I said, I feel good about it. I was drinking from a fire hose, but, one of the things I'm real excited about was the staff I put together. I took my time. I was deliberate with that, and that, you build your staff, and we were kind of halfway through, and I was still in Dallas when we were building the roster. But no, I like our guys. And I never wanted to get into bidding wars. I wanted guys to, come here because they wanted to be here, and they saw that they wanted the same things we did as a staff.
I know we're still early in the summer, but as you evaluate with your staff potential roles, are there any players that you are obviously going to have next season at Utah that you foresee being, factors in the Pac-12 individually? The Big 12, excuse me.
Yeah, that's one thing I can't wait to have time to do is sit down and watch Big 12 games.
Yeah,
then I'll get a better feel for that. But I have watched a handful, and it's a unique league. It's physical. There's great coaches, but no, we have a handful of players. It'll be interesting to see. I'm actually looking forward to, you look at rotations. It's always easy to, on the outside looking in, to okay, this guy should start. This guy should play this many minutes. But I'm excited to see how they fit together. But, we got, Terrence Brown is from Minneapolis. We came from Fairleigh Dickinson, Babacar Faye. We have some good guys that it's kind of fun now, like I said, because they're getting together, they're playing together, and we're all getting a better feel for that. But I'm excited about all of them.
How do you plan to balance high school recruiting with transfer recruiting with international recruiting moving forward as a head coach? That's
a good one. I think there's a balance. I've heard a lot of things. I'm still learning. The portal's a huge. We spent most of our time there. My goal here, going back to my comment on continuity, I think a balance of all of those. And I think the best thing, I hired a GM that's been in the NBA for 25 years, Wes Wilcox, and that's what he's done. He doesn't want to coach. He's built and balanced rosters, but I think I'm looking forward to that too. But I think there's a balance of all three, because I think you need all three to have that continuity, so you're not getting a new team every year.
No, continuity is key, especially in this climate. And another thing that's key is scheduling. I know that's something that, sometimes goes to the back burner when you're putting together a roster in your first year as a head coach, but you're going to play Mississippi State in Salt Lake City. You're also going to play a couple of games in the Acrisure event in Palm Springs. Is there anything else of significance on Utah's non-conference schedule for 25-26?
You know what? That was, I remember doing it 15 years ago. And, with the Pac-12 being no more, it's interesting because you don't want to necessarily travel far for those games. There's not too many options out of our league west, but, we made calls to most of the tier 1 teams, and it's almost done. And I think it'll be a competitive one. I think we have 1 or 2 more games, then it'll come out. But I think we had those games on the schedule, but we're trying to play a good schedule. And every year in the NCAA, you hear the stories and the reports about who should have got in and who shouldn't have got in. So we're conscious of that. Plus, being back for the first year, you want to have a good schedule for your fans.
No question. Final thing here, Alex, as you move forward, and I know this is only June, and I know obviously you're not ready to talk yet and forecast wins and losses, but what are the biggest things you want to accomplish in your first season as the head coach at Utah?
Going back to when I took the job, hired staff, put together a roster. I've hired people, and I think we have players. Like the goals are for what we do here. Like I'm thinking long term. The things off the court, just building a program and having the things that enable success for the long run. Not trying to hit it out of the park in the first year. I mean, obviously, you're going to try to win every game we have, but I think it seems like that's the mentality right now. It's like a rush year to year, and going back to the continuity. I want to build for the future.
All right. Well, Alex, we look forward to covering it. Congratulations on the job. Thanks for a couple minutes. Know how busy you are, and as always, look forward to staying connected along the way.
All right. Thank you, John.
You got it. That's Utah head coach Alex Jensen. I'm John Rothstein. We'll be back after this.
Get ready.
Wait a second. I thought we were going tubing.
All 3 Sonic the Hedgehog movies and Knuckles are now streaming on Paramount+.
And everyone loves it.
Every adventure.
Just try to keep up.
Every face-off.
This ends now.
And every moment that will have you saying,
"Where have you been?" My entire life!
It's showtime!
All 3 Sonic the Hedgehog movies and the entire Sonic universe are now streaming on Paramount+.
I'd like to thank Utah head coach Alex Jensen for joining us here on the CBS Sports College Basketball YouTube page. John Rothstein back with you. We're going to wrap this with 3 good nuggets. First one is the SEC by the numbers. As I have all offseason on social media, I am going through the power conferences and looking at returning scoring. The only schools in the SEC that returned over 40% of their scoring from last season, Arkansas led the way at 45%. Missouri was at 44.1%. Remember, Anthony Robinson, Mark Mitchell back for Dennis Gates' squad. And then Florida, the defending national champions, returned 40.6% of its scoring from last year's team that won the whole thing. That's obviously made up of Alex Condon, Tommy Houck, Micah Handlogden, and Ruben Shinyolu. Meanwhile, Elite Eight rematch, I talked about this earlier in the show. According to a source I reported last week, that Arkansas, Texas Tech are going to play in Dallas on December 13th. So a lot of big games coming together for both programs. Remember, Arkansas is going to be playing Duke on CBS on Thanksgiving night. Arkansas also going to play Louisville in the ACC SEC Challenge. And then a note on the NBA draft, which is later this week. And I want to congratulate all these great young men and players who are going to have their dreams realized. Since 2015, 3 of the NBA draft's number 1 overall picks, Anthony Edwards, Markelle Fultz, and Ben Simmons, all played on teams that did not make the NCAA tournament. And it's interesting because when people talk recruiting in college basketball, normally when people talk and they say, well, they're bringing in this player, he's a lottery pick, so on and so forth, you think, well, that might mean that the team that he's playing on is going to play deep, deep, deep into the NCAA tournament. There's not a direct correlation, and history proves that. And you look now at 3 players who could go in the top 10 coming up here later this week, 2 from Rutgers, Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey, and then another Colin Murray Boyles from South Carolina. None of those programs were close to the NCAA tournament. So just because your program brings in somebody who is projected to be one and done or to be a lottery pick, that doesn't mean it will directly correlate to obviously a deep run in March Madness, which is what everybody wants to shoot for, especially in college basketball. Would like to thank Utah head coach Alex Jensen for joining us here today. We will be back later in the week with another episode. John Rothstein reminding you that this is only June.